My name is Brenda, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story, but sometimes life has a way of teaching you lessons you never saw coming. 3 years ago, I thought I had found my forever person in Marcus. We were living our perfect little life in Denver, planning our dream wedding, and I genuinely believed we were unbreakable. But sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who end up showing us exactly what we're worth to them. And sometimes, when someone tells you that you're easily replaceable, the best thing you can do is prove them right in ways they never expected. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Marcus and I had built what I thought was a beautiful life together in our downtown Denver apartment. The space overlooked the bustling streets below, and every morning we'd drink coffee on our small balcony, watching the city wake up around us. I worked as a marketing coordinator for a growing tech company, while Marcus spent his days as a software engineer, writing code and solving problems that honestly went way over my head. Our love story began 3 years earlier at a small coffee shop near the University of Colorado Boulder. I was finishing up my master's degree, buried in textbooks and stress, when this quiet guy with kind eyes asked if he could share my table. The place was packed, and I figured why not. We ended up talking for 4 hours straight. Marcus had this gentle way about him, thoughtful and measured in everything he said. He wasn't the type to dominate a conversation, but when he spoke, you found yourself hanging on every word. Our first real date was a disaster that somehow became perfect. Marcus had volunteered to cook dinner at his place, confidently telling me he made an amazing pasta dish. What he failed to mention was that his cooking skills were basically non-existent. The smoke alarm went off twice, the pasta turned into mush, and the sauce somehow ended up resembling chunky orange paint. We ended up ordering pizza and eating it on his kitchen floor, laughing until our sides hurt. That night I knew I was falling for this wonderfully imperfect man. The proposal happened 18 months later at Red Rocks Amphitheater during a sunset concert. Marcus had been acting nervous all day, fidgeting with his jacket pocket and stumbling over simple sentences. When the band took a break between sets, he suddenly dropped to one knee right there in our seats. The ring was absolutely perfect, a princess-cut diamond set in a simple platinum band. Nothing flashy or over the top, just elegant and timeless, exactly like I'd always dreamed. The entire amphitheater erupted in cheers when I said yes, and for that moment I felt like the luckiest woman alive. We'd been engaged for 8 months and had our wedding planned for the following June at a gorgeous venue in Aspen. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. Marcus had always been open about his past, including his relationship with his ex-girlfriend Stephanie. They'd dated for 2 years before breaking up about 6 months before we met. From what Marcus told me, Stephanie was brilliant and ambitious, but they'd wanted different things in life. She'd moved to Seattle to take a position at Microsoft, and as far as I knew, that was the end of their story. But 2 weeks ago, Stephanie's name started appearing on Marcus's phone again. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A text here and there, maybe catching up on old times. Marcus mentioned she was asking about some mutual friends from college, nothing that seemed particularly concerning. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't create a small knot of unease in my stomach. There was something about the way Marcus's demeanor shifted slightly when her name came up. A subtle change that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The changes in Marcus started small, almost imperceptible at first. He'd always been someone who left his phone lying around casually, never thinking twice about it buzzing with notifications while he was in another room. But suddenly, the phone became attached to his hip. He'd take it with him to the bathroom, keep it face down during dinner, and I noticed him glancing at it more frequently throughout our conversations. The first real red flag came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working late from home, trying to finish a presentation for a client meeting the next day. Marcus had gone to his usual gym session after work, something he did religiously 3 times a week. I was deep in my work when his phone, which he'd left charging on the kitchen counter, started buzzing repeatedly. The screen lit up again and again, and I couldn't help but notice the name that kept appearing. Steph. 5 messages in the span of 2 minutes. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay focused on my laptop screen. Trust was something I'd always prided myself on in relationships. I'd never been the type to snoop through someone's phone or demand explanations for every interaction. But seeing that name pop up so insistently made my chest tighten with anxiety I hadn't felt in years. When Marcus came home 20 minutes later, sweaty from his workout and in a good mood, I decided to approach the subject gently. I waited until he'd showered and we were settling in for the evening. Your phone was going off while you were gone, I mentioned casually, not looking up from my laptop. Looked like Stephanie was trying to reach you. The change in his expression was immediate and unmistakable. His jaw tensed and he quickly grabbed his phone from the counter, checking the messages with his back turned to me. Yeah, she's just asking about some people from our old friend group, he said, his voice carrying an edge I wasn't used to hearing. You don't need to worry about every little thing, Brenda. The dismissiveness in his tone caught me off guard. In 3 years together, Marcus had never spoken to me like that, with that particular mixture of irritation and condescension. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck, as if I'd been caught doing something wrong by simply mentioning what I'd observed. I wasn't worrying, I replied quietly. I just thought you'd want to know she'd tried to reach you. Marcus didn't respond. He pocketed his phone and turned on the television, effectively ending the conversation. That night, for the first time in our relationship, he rolled over in bed and turned his back to me without our usual goodnight kiss. The pattern continued throughout the week. Friday evening, we went to dinner at the Capitol Grill, one of our favorite restaurants where we'd celebrated every major milestone in our relationship. We'd just ordered our entrees when Marcus's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at the screen, and I saw his expression shift. Without a word, he quickly flipped the phone face down and shoved it into his jacket pocket. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Fine, he said curtly, not meeting my eyes. Just work stuff. But I'd caught a glimpse of the screen before he'd hidden it. The message preview hadn't shown enough for me to read the content, but I'd seen enough to know it wasn't from anyone at his office. The atmosphere at dinner became strained, with Marcus giving short answers to my attempts at conversation and constantly seeming distracted by something I couldn't see. By Sunday morning, I'd reached my breaking point. The tension had been building for over a week, and I could feel the distance growing between us like a chasm I didn't know how to cross. We were sitting on our balcony with our usual morning coffee. The Denver skyline spread out before us in the early autumn sunlight. It was the kind of morning that used to feel perfect, peaceful, and full of possibility. Now it felt heavy with unspoken words and growing resentment. I'd spent the entire night before staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to address what was happening between us. Marcus had been increasingly distant, irritable over small things that never used to bother him, and constantly protective of his phone in ways that felt completely out of character. I knew I had to say something, but I also knew that whatever came next might change everything between us. Marcus, I began carefully, setting down my coffee cup and turning to face him. I've been feeling a bit disconnected from you lately, and I think we need to talk about it. His reaction was immediate and defensive. He set his own cup down with more force than necessary and let out an exasperated sigh. Here we go again, he muttered, already standing up from his chair. What do you mean again? I asked, genuinely confused. This is the first time I've brought up feeling disconnected. You're always bringing up something, Brenda. Always analyzing every little thing I do, questioning every conversation I have. It's exhausting. The accusation hit me like a slap. In our 3 years together, I'd never been possessive or controlling. I'd always given Marcus space for his friendships, his hobbies, his independence. The characterization of myself as someone who was always questioning him felt completely unfair and frankly shocking. I'm not trying to analyze anything, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I'm just noticing that things feel different between us lately, especially since Stephanie started reaching out more frequently. The mention of her name was like lighting a match near gasoline. Marcus began pacing back and forth across our small balcony, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I cannot believe you're bringing this up again, he said, his voice rising. Stephanie is just a friend. We have mutual friends, we have history, and sometimes people from your past reach out. That's normal, Brenda. What's not normal is having a fiancé who can't handle basic adult friendships. I'm not trying to control your friendships, I replied, working hard to maintain my composure, even as my heart began racing. I just want to understand why she's texting you so much, and why you seem to feel the need to hide it from me. Hide it? Marcus spun around to face me, his eyes blazing with anger. I'm not hiding anything. You're just being paranoid and insecure, and honestly, it's not attractive. The word insecure hung in the air between us like poison. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. This wasn't the man I'd fallen in love with. This wasn't the gentle, thoughtful person who'd spent hours talking with me in that coffee shop 3 years ago. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to look at me with an expression I'd never seen before. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth and love I'd grown accustomed to seeing there. "Look, Brenda," he said, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone, "you need to understand something. You're easily replaceable. Don't forget that. If you can't handle me having friends, maybe you're not the right person for me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face and my hands begin to tremble. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about Marcus, about myself, came crashing down around me. The man I was planning to marry, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future, had just told me I was easily replaceable. I sat there in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. My mind was racing, processing the cruelty of what he'd just said, the casual way he'd delivered such a devastating blow. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw my coffee cup at him, to unleash all the hurt and anger that was building in my chest like a volcano. Instead, something unexpected happened. I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me, as if a fog I hadn't even realized was there had suddenly lifted. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in months. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but a knowing one. "You're absolutely right, Marcus," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I should remember that." Marcus's angry expression faltered, replaced by confusion. This clearly wasn't the reaction he'd been expecting. He'd wanted me to beg, to apologize, to promise to be less insecure and more accepting of whatever was happening with Stephanie. I stood up calmly and picked up both of our coffee cups. "Thank you for reminding me," I added, walking past him toward the kitchen. "Brenda, wait," he called after me, his voice now uncertain. I didn't mean we should talk about this, but I was already inside, rinsing out the cups and beginning to plan exactly how I was going to prove him right. The next 3 weeks were the most strategically productive of my entire life. Marcus had given me a gift, though he didn't realize it yet. He'd shown me exactly who he was and exactly what he thought of me. Now it was time to show him what someone who was easily replaceable could accomplish when she put her mind to it. Week 1 began with reconnaissance. I'd always been good at research, a skill that served me well in my marketing job, and now I was about to put those abilities to much more personal use. I started by reaching out to Emma, a mutual friend from Marcus's college days who'd always been friendly toward me. Emma worked at a nonprofit in Boulder and had stayed in touch with several people from their old friend group. "I was just wondering," I said during what seemed like a casual phone call, "has Stephanie been in touch with you lately? Marcus mentioned she was reaching out to people from college." Emma's response was more illuminating than I'd expected. "Actually, yes," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "She called me about 3 weeks ago, asking all sorts of questions about Marcus, how he was doing, whether he seemed happy, if he ever talked about her. Honestly, Brenda, it felt a little weird. She also asked about you specifically, wanted to know how serious things were between you two." My heart began pounding, but I kept my voice casual. "Did she mention why she was asking?" "She said she'd been going through a rough time and was thinking about old friends. But then Sarah told me that Stephanie had been asking her the same kinds of questions, and Jake said she'd reached out to him too. It kind of seemed like she was fishing for information about Marcus specifically." After I hung up with Emma, I did some digging of my own. Social media made it surprisingly easy to piece together recent events in someone's life, especially when they weren't particularly careful about their privacy settings. Within an hour, I'd discovered that Stephanie had changed her relationship status from in a relationship to single, exactly 5 weeks earlier. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Throughout that first week, I maintained a completely normal demeanor with Marcus. In fact, I went out of my way to be extra thoughtful and caring. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his day with genuine interest, and never once brought up Stephanie or his phone habits. Marcus seemed confused by this shift, clearly expecting ongoing conflict about our balcony confrontation. Instead, he found a fiancé who appeared to have taken his words to heart and was working extra hard to be worthy of his attention. Week 2 was when I began preparing for what I was already thinking of as the reveal. I knew about Marcus's family reunion at Lake Tahoe because his mother had mentioned it to me months earlier. The Peterson family gathering was an annual tradition, held every October at a beautiful resort on the Nevada side of the lake. This year would be special because it was the first time I'd been invited as Marcus's fiancé, a fact that Mrs. Peterson had mentioned excitedly during our last phone call. What I found interesting was that Marcus hadn't brought up the reunion in over a month. When his mother had first told me about it, He'd seemed enthusiastic about introducing me to extended family members I hadn't met yet. Now, with the event less than 2 weeks away, he hadn't mentioned it at all. I decided to do some detective work. I called Sarah, Marcus's sister-in-law, under the pretense of asking about what to pack for the mountain weather. "Oh," Sarah said, sounding surprised. "Marcus didn't tell you. He said you weren't going to be able to make it this year because of work commitments." The lie was so casual, so smoothly delivered through a third party, that it took my breath away. Marcus had uninvited me to his family reunion and hadn't even bothered to inform me of this decision. "Right," I said, thinking quickly. "Actually, my work situation just changed, so I might be able to come after all." I wanted to surprise him. "That would be wonderful," Sarah exclaimed. "The whole family has been looking forward to getting to know you better." That conversation led me to make a phone call I never thought I'd make in my life. I hired a private investigator. Jake Morrison came highly recommended by a colleague whose husband had used his services during a messy business dispute. Jake was professional, discreet, and surprisingly affordable. When I explained what I needed, he didn't ask unnecessary questions or make me feel ashamed for wanting proof of what I already suspected. "I just need to know the truth," I told him during our coffee shop meeting. "Whatever that truth is." "I understand completely," Jake replied. "Give me 1 week. Week 3 was when everything came together." Jake's report arrived in my email on Monday morning, and it was more comprehensive than I'd dared to hope. Screenshots of text message conversations, photos taken with a telephoto lens, credit card records that Marcus had foolishly used for activities he was lying about. The text messages were the most damning. Stephanie wasn't just casually reaching out to an old friend. She was actively trying to rekindle their relationship, and Marcus was enthusiastically participating. Messages like, "I made a huge mistake letting you go, and being with Brenda must be so different from what we had," painted a clear picture of emotional infidelity at minimum. The photos showed Marcus and Stephanie meeting for coffee at a place downtown. The same afternoon he'd told me he was working late on a critical project deadline. They were sitting close together, leaning in toward each other in a way that looked nothing like a casual catch-up between old friends. But the credit card records were what sealed it. Marcus had booked and paid for a cabin rental near Lake Tahoe for the same weekend as the family reunion. The reservation was for 2 people, and it definitely wasn't for him and me. I spent Tuesday preparing my presentation. Yes, I was actually creating a slideshow, complete with professional-looking graphics and a logical flow of information. If Marcus thought I was easily replaceable, he was about to learn exactly what he was replacing me with. Wednesday, I booked my own flight to Reno and a rental car. Thursday, I went shopping for the perfect outfit, something that would make me look confident and put together while also being appropriate for a family gathering. I settled on an emerald green wrap dress that brought out my eyes and made me feel powerful. Friday morning, Marcus left for the airport with a suitcase and what he thought were foolproof lies about a guy's weekend with some college friends. He kissed me goodbye at the door, looked me straight in the eyes, and told me he'd miss me. "Have a great time," I replied sweetly. "I'm sure it will be a weekend you'll never forget." He had no idea how right I was. Lake Tahoe in October was breathtaking. The resort Marcus's family had chosen sat right on the water, with the mountains rising dramatically on all sides, their peaks dusted with early snow. The autumn colors were at their peak, painting the landscape in brilliant golds and reds that reflected perfectly in the lake's crystal-clear surface. Under different circumstances, it would have been the kind of place where I'd want to spend a romantic weekend. Instead, it was about to become the stage for the most dramatic confrontation of my life. I timed my arrival perfectly. According to the family group chat that I was still part of, everyone was gathering at the main lodge around 4:30 for drinks and appetizers before dinner. I checked into my room, took a long shower, and carefully applied my makeup. The emerald dress fit perfectly, and I'd had my hair professionally styled that morning in Reno. Looking in the mirror, I felt more confident and self-assured than I had in months. At 4:45, I walked into the main lodge's lakeside terrace. The Peterson family was exactly where I'd expected them to be, gathered around a large table near the outdoor bar, with the stunning lake view as their backdrop. Marcus's parents, Robert and Dorothy, were holding court at one end of the table. His brother David was there with his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake. His other brother James had arrived with his wife Lisa and their daughter Sophie, who was 5 and absolutely adorable in a tiny sundress. And there, sitting closer to Marcus than any old friend had a right to sit, was Stephanie. She looked exactly like I'd expected based on the photos Jake had provided, but seeing her in person still felt like a punch to the gut. Tall and willowy, with perfectly straight blonde hair and the kind of effortless style that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was wearing a navy blue sundress and laughing at something Marcus was saying, her hand resting casually on his forearm. Marcus himself looked more relaxed and happy than I'd seen him in weeks. He was gesturing animatedly while telling some story, and when Stephanie laughed, he lit up like she'd just handed him the greatest gift in the world. His body language was completely different around her, more open and engaged than he'd been with me in months. The moment I stepped onto the terrace, the entire dynamic shifted. Little Emma saw me first and let out an excited squeal. "Aunt Brenda," she yelled, jumping up from her chair and running toward me. The rest of the family turned to look, and I watched Marcus's face go through about 5 different emotions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, panic, and something that might have been guilt all flashed across his features before settling into an expression of barely controlled terror. "Brenda," he said, his voice cracking slightly. What are you doing here?" I scooped Emma up in a big hug and smiled brilliantly at the assembled family. "Hi everyone," I said, my voice warm and genuinely happy. I wanted to surprise my fiancé, and finally meet his wonderful family properly. I've been looking forward to this for months. Mrs. Peterson stood up, looking flustered but pleased. "Oh, Brenda dear, we didn't know you were coming. Marcus said you had work commitments. Work stuff got resolved," I replied, still smiling. "I managed to clear my schedule at the last minute. I hope it's okay that I crashed the party." "Of course it's okay," Mr. Peterson said, pulling out a chair for me. "We're delighted you could make it." Throughout this exchange, Stephanie had remained seated, but I could feel her studying me with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. When Marcus made no move to introduce us, I took matters into my own hands. "Marcus," I said, my voice sweet as honey, "aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. This is Stephanie. Stephanie, this is Brenda, my fiancé." Stephanie stood up and extended her hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nice to meet you, Brenda. Marcus has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "He's mentioned you too. It's so nice when old friends reconnect." For the next 15 minutes, I proceeded to charm the pants off Marcus's family. I asked about their jobs, complimented Mrs. Peterson on her beautiful jewelry, played with the kids, and shared stories about the wedding planning that had Marcus shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I was the picture of a happy, devoted fiancé who was thrilled to be included in this special family tradition. Stephanie, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. She kept glancing at Marcus as if waiting for him to rescue her from the situation. But Marcus was too busy trying not to have a panic attack to be of much help. "Brenda," little Sophie piped up, "did you bring your camera? Mommy said you take really good pictures." "As a matter of fact, I did," I said, patting my purse. "I brought my camera and something else special to share with everyone. Family memories are so precious, don't you think?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small USB drive, which I promptly dropped on the ground as if by accident. "Oops," I said, bending to pick it up. "How clumsy of me." "What's on there?" Emma asked with the curiosity only a 7-year-old could muster. "Oh, just some special memories I thought everyone might enjoy seeing," I replied. "Would it be okay if we looked at them on someone's laptop? I put together a little presentation." Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands together excitedly. "What a wonderful idea, Robert. Go get your laptop from the room." Marcus finally found his voice. "Brenda, maybe we should do this later. People might want to relax before dinner." "Nonsense," Mr. Peterson said, already heading toward the lodge. "I love family photo presentations. This will be fun." As we waited for him to return, I continued making pleasant conversation, asking Stephanie about her job in Seattle and complimenting her dress. She answered politely, but I could see the tension building in her shoulders. Marcus, meanwhile, looked like he was considering making a run for it. When Mr. Peterson returned with the laptop, everyone gathered around expectantly. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I inserted the USB drive and opened my carefully prepared presentation. "This is so exciting," I said, clicking to the first slide. "I hope everyone enjoys this little trip down memory lane." The first few slides were exactly what everyone expected. Beautiful photos of Marcus and me from our early dating days, pictures from our engagement, shots of us hiking in the Rocky Mountains and exploring Denver together. The family made appreciative sounds, and even Stephanie managed to look politely interested, though I noticed her jaw was getting tighter with each image. "You two look so happy together," Mrs. Peterson said warmly. "Marcus, you never showed us that picture of you two at the farmer's market. Brenda, you'll have to send me copies of some of these." "Of course," I replied. "I love sharing special memories with people who matter." Marcus was staring at the laptop screen like it might explode at any moment. He'd started to speak several times but seemed unable to form actual words. Stephanie had moved her chair slightly away from the table, probably preparing for a quick exit. "This next section is particularly interesting," I said, clicking to the next slide. "It shows how some old friendships can unexpectedly bloom again." The screen filled with a screenshot of text messages. At the top, it clearly showed Marcus's phone number and the contact name, Steph. The messages were from 3 weeks earlier, right around the time of our balcony confrontation. "Stephanie, I miss you so much, Marcus. I can't stop thinking about what we had, Marcus. I miss you too. Things with Brenda are complicated. She doesn't understand me the way you do, Stephanie. I made such a mistake when I moved to Seattle. I thought my career was more important than love, Marcus. Maybe it's not too late to fix things. I've been thinking the same thing." The silence around the table was deafening. Mrs. Peterson's hand flew to her mouth, and Mr. Peterson's expression darkened considerably. David and James exchanged glances that could have melted steel, while Sarah grabbed her children and pulled them slightly away from the table. "Marcus," Mr. Peterson said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what is this?" Marcus shot up from his chair like he'd been electrocuted. "Dad, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I said, my voice still perfectly pleasant. "Because I have more context that might help clarify things." I clicked to the next slide before anyone could stop me. This one showed a series of photos that Jake had taken with his telephoto lens. Marcus and Stephanie at a downtown Denver coffee shop, sitting much closer than old friends typically would. The timestamp showed it was from the previous Tuesday, the same day Marcus had told me he was working late on a critical project. "These were taken while I was at home working on my own project," I explained conversationally. I was under the impression that Marcus was at the office dealing with a work emergency. Apparently, the emergency was catching up with old friends. Stephanie finally found her voice. "Mrs. Peterson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Marcus and I were just talking about old times. Is that what you call it?" Sarah said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were actively trying to break up an engagement." I held up my hand gently. "Please, everyone, let's not get upset just yet. I have one more thing to share, and then I think we'll all have a much clearer picture of the situation." The final slide was a screenshot of a booking confirmation. Lake Tahoe Cabin Rentals, for a 2-person occupancy cabin just 3 miles from the resort where we were currently sitting. The reservation dates matched exactly with the family reunion weekend. The name on the booking was Marcus Peterson, and the payment method was the joint credit card that Marcus and I shared for household expenses. "I have to admit," I said, looking directly at Marcus, "when I saw this charge on our credit card statement, I was initially confused, but now it all makes perfect sense." The explosion of voices was immediate and overlapping. Mr. Peterson was demanding explanations. Mrs. Peterson was asking how Marcus could do such a thing, and both of his brothers were expressing their disgust in terms that probably shouldn't have been used in front of the children. Through it all, Marcus stood there looking like a deer caught in headlights. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no coherent words came out. I stood up slowly, reached into my purse and pulled out my engagement ring. The princess-cut diamond caught the late afternoon light streaming across the lake, sending little rainbows dancing across the table. "Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, "you were absolutely right about something. I am easily replaceable." I set the ring down in the center of the table with a soft clink. "The thing is," I continued, "so are you." Mrs. Peterson started crying. Mr. Peterson looked like he wanted to throw Marcus into the lake. David shook his head in disgust and muttered something about never trusting Marcus with anything important again. Little Emma, who had been watching the adult drama with wide eyes, tugged on my dress. "Aunt Brenda," she said in a small voice, "are you still going to be my aunt?" I knelt down to her level, my heart breaking a little bit. "Maybe not officially, sweetie, but you'll always be special to me. And your Uncle Marcus is going to have to figure out how to be a better person." Stephanie had gone completely pale. "Mrs. Peterson, I never meant for any of this to happen. I was going through a difficult time and I made some poor choices." Mrs. Peterson looked at her with an expression of pure ice. "I think you should leave." "Now, Mom," Marcus finally managed to say. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" Mr. Peterson said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Explain how you lied to your fiancé, lied to your family, and spent your joint money on a romantic weekend with another woman? Explain how you told the woman you promised to marry that she was easily replaceable. Marcus's face crumbled. I didn't mean it like that. I was angry and I said something stupid. No, I said firmly, standing back up. You meant it exactly like that. And you know what? You did me the biggest favor of my life by showing me who you really are before I married you. I picked up my purse and smiled at the family who had welcomed me so warmly. Thank you all for being such wonderful people, I said. I'll always treasure the time we've had together, and I hope someday Marcus figures out how to deserve the love you've given him. As I walked away from the table, I could hear the family continuing to express their disappointment in Marcus. Mrs. Peterson was crying harder now, and Mr. Peterson was telling Marcus that he'd raised him better than this. But I didn't look back. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely free. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different coffee shop in a different city, watching the sun rise over the mountains outside Boulder, Colorado. My life had changed in ways I never could have imagined that day at Lake Tahoe. And looking back, I could honestly say that every single change had been for the better. The first few weeks after the confrontation had been brutal, I won't lie about that. I'd moved back to Boulder temporarily, staying with Emma, my college roommate, while I figured out my next steps. There had been nights when I cried until I had no tears left, mourning not just the relationship I'd lost but the future I'd planned that would never happen. The wedding venue had to be canceled, deposits lost, explanations given to friends and family who'd been looking forward to celebrating with us. But Emma had been incredible during those dark early days. She'd taken time off work to be with me, made sure I ate actual meals instead of surviving on coffee and sadness, and listened patiently while I processed everything that had happened. She never once said, "I told you so," even though I later learned she'd had her own concerns about Marcus that she'd kept to herself out of loyalty to my happiness. The therapy sessions had been Emma's idea, and they'd ended up being one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Dr. Sarah Chen helped me understand that Marcus's behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth as a person, but rather a window into his own character and values. She helped me see that someone who truly loved me would never try to make me feel easily replaceable. No matter how angry or frustrated they might be in the moment, healthy relationships don't involve psychological warfare, Dr. Chen had told me during one particularly enlightening session. When someone uses your deepest fears as weapons against you, they're showing you that they don't have your best interests at heart. 3 months after the Lake Tahoe incident, I'd made the decision to stay in Boulder permanently. I'd found a position with a growing environmental nonprofit that felt much more meaningful than my previous corporate job. The pay was lower, but the work fulfilled me in ways I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I was helping promote sustainable tourism in Colorado, combining my marketing skills with my love for the outdoors. It was at a local art gallery opening, celebrating photographers who captured the beauty of the Colorado wilderness, that I met Daniel. He was one of the featured artists, a freelance photographer who specialized in landscape and nature photography. We struck up a conversation about a particular shot he'd taken of sunrise over the Flatirons, and I found myself talking to him for over an hour without realizing how much time had passed. Daniel was everything Marcus hadn't been. He listened when I spoke, asked thoughtful questions about my work and interests, and never once made me feel like I needed to compete for his attention. When I eventually told him about my broken engagement, he didn't push for details or make judgments. He simply said he was sorry I'd been hurt, and that he hoped I was healing. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally. Coffee dates turned into hiking adventures, which led to weekend camping trips where Daniel would photograph the sunrise while I read books by the campfire. He never made me feel like I was easily replaceable. Instead, he seemed to delight in the things that made me uniquely me. From my tendency to research everything obsessively, to my ability to find the silver lining in almost any situation. Through Sarah, who had stayed in touch despite everything, I learned that Marcus and Stephanie's reunion had lasted exactly 2 months. Apparently, the reality of their relationship didn't live up to the fantasy they'd built up in their text messages. Stephanie had returned to Seattle, and Marcus was living alone in our old Denver apartment, reportedly struggling with depression and regret. "He asks about you sometimes," Sarah had told me during one of our phone calls. "He knows he messed up badly, and I think he's finally starting to understand what he lost." Part of me felt sad for Marcus, but it was the kind of sadness you might feel for a stranger going through a difficult time, not the deep personal pain I'd expected. I'd truly moved on, and that realization was both surprising and liberating. The most important lesson I'd learned through the entire experience was about my own worth. For too long, I'd been willing to accept less than I deserved because I was afraid of being alone. Marcus's cruel words about being easily replaceable had actually freed me from that fear by forcing me to confront it head-on. I wasn't easily replaceable. I was thoughtful, loyal, intelligent, and capable of deep love. I deserved a partner who recognized those qualities and treasured them, not someone who would use them against me when things got difficult. Daniel and I had been talking about moving to Portland together, where he'd been offered a position with a magazine that focused on environmental conservation. The opportunity excited both of us, representing a chance to build something new together while pursuing work that mattered to us. Sitting in that Boulder coffee shop, watching the morning light paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, who was out capturing the sunrise from a different vantage point. "Hope you're having a beautiful morning," his message read. "Can't wait to see you later and hear about your meeting with the Portland people." I smiled and typed back, "Every morning is beautiful when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Sometimes the most painful experiences in our lives turn out to be the greatest gifts, even though we can't see it at the time. Being told I was easily replaceable had hurt more than I thought possible, but it had also forced me to realize that I deserved someone who saw me as irreplaceable. And now I had found exactly that. Marcus had been right about one thing. I was easily replaceable in his life. But that said everything about him and nothing about me. The right person doesn't want to replace you. They want to build a life with you that neither of you could create alone. As I finished my coffee and prepared to head home to Daniel, I realized that I was grateful for every painful moment that had led me to this point. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. If you've ever been in a relationship where someone made you feel like you weren't worth fighting for, I want you to know that you deserve so much better. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who didn't value you the way you deserved? Share your story in the comments below, and let's support each other through these difficult experiences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that they are never easily replaceable to the right person. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Remember, you are worthy of love that builds you up instead of tearing you down, and never let anyone convince you otherwise.